Are you getting the most out of your GPS unit? If your team or club have just invested in a set of GPS units and you're trying to get the most out of the data you're collecting, or you're a player who's just bought one for yourself and you want to make sense of everything that you're collecting, should you just focus on what you get in games? Is it about distance covered, and the more distance you cover the better you've played, or is there a bit more nuance to that? There's any amount of things we can look at here. High speed running, sprint distance, top speed, accelerations, meters per minute, player load, but what do they all actually mean? A lot of teams and coaches make mistakes here, equating more distance covered or more work completed with a better performance, but sometimes we need to look a bit deeper than that. I asked Fionn O'Hegarty onto the podcast. He's a performance consultant who's worked across high levels of GAA, LGFA, Aussie Rules and Rugby League. He gives us a breakdown of what all the metrics mean, how we can get the most use out of them all, whether it's best to focus on matches, or how we can use the information we gather in matches to inform trend to ensure we're getting the best out of that while still developing everything we want tactically and technically, to ensure we're not just well prepared physically, but we're actually prepared for the demands of the style of game we want to play. Fionn uses all his background and experience here to explain to us what the metrics actually are, but more importantly, how we can use them to design better training sessions and inform how we plan session by session, week by week, month by month, and across the whole year. Anyone with access to GPS, whether it just be one or two pods or enough for your whole squad across any of the sports that we play, will get an awful lot from this conversation. And I'd recommend you follow Fionn on social media to keep up to date with the various information he puts out around how to get the best use out of both GPS and other aspects of performance. Fionn, we were just saying there, is it 12 years since we were over in Chicago kicking football? I think that's a neat point to thank today's sponsor, Sean Tobin Window Cleaning Services, downtown Chicago, who brought us all over to play football with Padraig Pearse's years ago.
Yeah, it was 12 years, just thinking back, this probably month 12 years ago that we met in Chicago through Sean Tobin and the Padraig Pearse's GAA club. And here we are now recording a podcast on all things S&C and sports science.
I remember actually there's a YouTuber, a marathoner I follow, Eric Flober. He's a good marathoner, he's like 2 hours 30. But he trains on the track where we used to often train on Tuesday nights. I'm like, I can see the hill we ran up so many times there in the background, getting all the memories from it.
Or the tree that we're hiding behind.
Trying to get away from. So Fionn, we would have met a few times before as well, since Chicago, talking about various PE teaching stuff, and we both went off in directions around like sports science, S&C, everything like that. And you've since moved completely away from PE and gone much deeper into the sports science, the S&C, and you're now not fully specialising, but one of your strongest areas is the effective use of GPS, and that's what we're going to jump into today.
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose with over 10 years, we'll say, coaching experience, and over the last 5 years, I started getting into, I suppose, GPS and the practical use of GPS in sports settings. And I only started off with 1 or 2 GPSs practicing on myself, and then I suppose putting it on players as I was training them, just trying to get a measure on, I suppose, the sessions themselves and see what actually was coming back from the session, the planned session from my point of view, and also from the coach's point of view. And there's many benefits from using GPSs once I suppose you use it correctly, and I'm just going to go through some benefits there now, if that's all right. Yeah,
I'll just frame it with a little story first. I've only really used GPS once. I was with an intercounty team 2018, 2019, so we had it then, and any of the clubs I've worked with since haven't had it. But remember one year I was with a club and we were playing second round of senior football championship, and the team we were playing against it was post-COVID, so we weren't allowed in dressing rooms, but they were taking off their training tops, putting on their jerseys, and the opposition all had GPS on, and one of our subs was we are so far behind the times, look at them with GPS. And we went out and absolutely hockeyed them, bet them off the park. And I was trying to say to him on afterwards, it's not about having GPS, that doesn't make you fitter, it doesn't make you better at football, it's how you use it. And the same club, I was chatting to the same lad actually recently, and he says, we got GPS. And what you get from it, we found out that the lads who are away, train by themselves midweek, don't cover the same distance as lads who are at home and train, and we need to do something about that. And I said, in my head, I was like, I'm not sure that's the most effective use of it there. And that's where I wanted you to come in and be like, okay, what are some of the more effective uses? What are some of the more important metrics? All like that.
You hit the nail on the head there in terms of, we'll say, it is common, a lot of teams are using GPS, but what actually value are they getting out of it, and how are they applying the data that they're collecting from it? I suppose, like, from my own findings and my own learnings over the last few years, like, there's many benefits. For example, like, you have, like, look, it is an objective performance measure. So basically, it gives you an outline of, say, how much work you're getting done within the match or within the sessions themselves. It also is very valuable for preparing for the matches in terms of, we say, if you have physical targets you must hit within a session within the week, or a session or within a week's work. It'll give you a measure and feedback to if you're hitting that, to allow the players of the team or the athletes to be, I suppose, adequately prepared for the demands of the sport itself. Other things, I suppose, are, look, you could get a measure of, I suppose, the positional demands and the game demands, which is massively important, because at the end of the day, like, you would work back from that, and within your week you're working towards the position demands or the game demands. So therefore you're, I suppose, ensuring that your athletes, your team are adequately prepared for that, and, like we say, they're fit for purpose essentially. Other things as well, like, that I suppose I use a lot would be just workload management. For example, if you go off and you've a game next week or a game this weekend, and, like, you go off and give them 600-700 meters or sprint, like, more than likely they will be fairly fatigued for that game, or it could lead to high injury risk as well. So it gives you workload demands. It also makes sure that you are working enough within the weeks as well, because sometimes people think they're working hard, or they think that's a really hard session, but then if you actually get the data to compare to what is working hard, like, it would actually kind of, I suppose, give you some transparency there on that. Other things I suppose I'd look at would be, we'll say, like, from an injury prevention point of view. So you would often hear that, we'll say, you're using your GPS, and then they often say the speed vaccine. So therefore you're hitting like 90 to 95% of your max speed once every 10 to 12 days. And I use that a lot. I use that as I suppose one of the big measures is to try, I suppose, see the speed outputs per week, and I would be aiming in your sessions within the week, once they're not overly fatigued, and that I would be hitting your 90% of their max speed. And I would have, I suppose, a system within my Google Sheets that I'm reporting on, that it does track that when the data goes into the Google Sheet, that it will track up that it's 90 to 95% going off their all-time best that's in that system. Other parts, so I suppose, I'd look at would be, I suppose, some real-time response as well when I'm training the team. So I'd have the GPS Live, whether it be the Apex version of GPS, where it's more of a cheaper version, or it's the more expensive version that StatSports would provide, that you can see how much work has been done. And again, going back to your physical targets that you may have, to make sure that they're, like, properly prepared for the game that you're trying to prepare them for, and that they're hitting these targets. So again, it's taking the guesswork out of the work that's been done. Also, like, I suppose, personalized training programs and leg development. So if someone is trying to, I suppose, get fitter, get stronger, get faster, giving them so much, I suppose, metrics or work per session per week would allow them to, I suppose, train, firstly, adapt to the work that's been done, and also progress their fitness on that. And then other things would be, I suppose, like, just a simple thing is, I suppose, as a coach, it's important not to just get bogged down on the data and the GPS and the sports science. It's important to be able to have a coach's eye and be able to make observations and assumptions. And it just, I suppose, reaffirms, and I suppose it kind of confirms as well, like, that your assumptions are correct, or your observations are correct, or that it was a very intensive, tight session. Therefore, we have a lot of E cells and D cells on the GPS. I suppose to make that a better session, what we could do is just put in more high-speed running, for example, putting in a few 100-meter tempos, and that will give you a better, I suppose, overall session outcome physically, to make sure that they're preparing fit for purpose.
Okay, so nice bit we can jump into there. We'll start off, let's just say I'm new to all this. I've gotten a bit of a sugar daddy. He's come in, I manage his club team. He's like, I want to give money, I want to buy some GPS. And I'm looking at him saying, in my head, could probably use the money maybe somewhere else, but okay, let's buy it. What are a few key metrics I should maybe start looking at? Am I better looking at games or training or both? And it gives me an awful lot of information. What are some of the easiest bits I'll get a bit of bang for buck with, and what do they maybe mean, or how could I use them?
Oh, look, that's common. The people starting off with their GPS, what do they want to start off with? What can we actually look at? And for me, I suppose there's a few most important ones will be your max speed, like trying to, like, first of all, figure out what is your max speed, and to keep it nice and simple, like, say if they track their own max speed, and they'll just record in their notes, like, this is my max speed of 9 meters per second. And then I suppose regularly enough trying to get that max speed or near that max speed once a week, once every 2 weeks anyway, within their trainings or their matches. So max speed is very important for me.
Just on max speed there, is it better to try and just see what max speed they hit in a match or a game type situation, or should you actually set up some sprints and see what their top speed is hitting that to see is there a difference between?
Good question. So for me, I would set up sprints, or we say speed blocks within the week of training. You wouldn't really hit max speed so much in matches, because there's so many other variables happening within the match itself. So for example, every Wednesday would be typically my speed day, and I would have a speed block at the start of that and a sprint repeat block, and therefore in that then they would hit probably their max speed in that then. And then what I'd often do then is, in that max speed, I'd report back every month of their best max speed within the month. So to me, it's a way of me measuring, I suppose, their speed development, and also maybe measuring, also secondary to that is their fatigue as well. So typically if someone's loaded up with fatigue, they will not hit their max speed. So no, I would go after it within a training session, firstly, and then I would monitor then within the match itself. And like what I observed, I suppose, is typically within the match, they'd be going from 85% to 90% of their max speed. And in that speed block then, they would typically go from 92, 93 up to 100, or even hit a PB in that as well. So that's definitely a massive metric I'd go after, is the max speed, yeah. And then, as I mentioned previously, it's very good for, I suppose, injury prevention as well, and also, I suppose, conditioning in them hamstrings. That's a typical injury within field-based sports, such as Gaelic football or rugby or soccer as well. Other metrics I'd go after would be, I suppose, sprint distance and high speed running. Again, like we say, it's a way of managing load, but also it's a way of, I suppose, conditioning the legs and the hamstrings, especially because that's where a lot of the demand is coming from, is the hamstrings. And if you can get, I suppose, a consistent load of, I suppose, that work into them, typically it does prevent injuries, and also develops speed and intensity and intent in their running as well, and also their running performance, and also their work rate as well.
And do games inform training a bit here? So say if you find in a match someone on average, or a position on average, will cover 1,500 to 2,000 metres of high speed run, does that become not necessarily a target but a guiding principle in training? Are you looking to hit that same amount on average in trainings, or do you look at maybe hitting 1.5 to 2 times that across a week and disperse it a little bit more?
No, 100% for me. I suppose my principles of athletic development is, I would work back from the game itself. So I often get questions like, how much are you supposed to hit on, we say, a Wednesday, or how much are you supposed to hit on a Friday, if your training days are Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. And I would say actually just look at the game demands firstly and work back from that. And I actually I'd go for the full game itself, so the game and also the training or the warm up as well. And within that then, in the kind of the pre-season phase or late pre-season, I'd be looking to, I suppose, repeat your game demands and your intensity demands. For example, your high-speed running, your sprint on that Wednesday itself. So I go 100%, I often say 100% of your game day on the Wednesday, and then I just keep it nice and simple, and I just go 50% on your Friday of your game day. So for example, if you're going for 2,000 metres of high-speed running and the whole game day on the Sunday, I try to repeat that then on the Wednesday after 2 days off of rest and recovery, or near that anyway at least. And then on the Friday I would go 50% of that then, or in around that mark. So that's how I typically would program my physical work per week.
And that 2,000 metres on the Wednesday, that would be across small-sided or medium or large-sided games you're playing within training, plus some potential top-up runs based on, like, I assume over time you probably build up a bank of games. You know, on average 2 by 8 minutes will probably give us in around this distance, which means we need another 800 to 1,200 metres of extra work on the side, or, you know, in or around that.
100%. Like, ideally, to be honest, I'd like to get a lot of my work done through the games. It's more organically getting the work into them. Also the other, I suppose, tactical and technical demands as well in the games itself. So that's my go-to, that's my gold standard. But I suppose, again, from the coach's eye or observing the session itself, I would do top-ups. And like, I suppose, as you said, I would have an idea of how much this game will give me back with the dimensions or the rules or the principles in the game. For example, if it's a transitional game, I know they're going to get a lot of high speed running into them or sprint into them. And typically on my Wednesdays, I would have more extensive games, I suppose, programmed in, or we say transitional work in the teams of the session itself. So therefore, I wouldn't actually have to put in that much high speed running top ups at the end, for example, using 100-meter tempos or 65-meter tempos to top them up. So yeah, like it would be a mix of games and we'd say blocks, but typically it would be like 3/4 of it would be games, and then just kind of like an insurance that I would have that work done with the top up at the end then. And also I would try and monitor it as well as best as possible live, so therefore I'd be able to get an idea of where things are at then, you know. But for the club coaches that may not have a live tracking, ideally through games and well-designed games like that with larger spaces and good rules or principles in play, and then you could do a little top up at the end. Another one I suppose I use for ensuring that there's a lot of work being done within the games is this ball and play metric. Have you ever come across the ball and play metric? So basically, for example, if you're 30-minute half and you observe that the ball is in play for 17 to 20 minutes of the half itself, within the normal, we say, championship game or league game, within my games then, in the modified games within the session itself, I try go after that, and I just try encourage the coaches to say, right, try quick restarts, fast transitional work, fast tempo work, and like coach on the fly as well. Don't try stop up the games and coach, blocking up the time. And typically that does bring up the intensity, bring up the tempo, and also brings up the movement, which will bring on my high speed running, my sprint, and also it would, I suppose, drive that fitness development as well in aerobic work, because they're always going and the rest is reduced. So that's one I kind of go after a lot recently, and I get a lot of good return from it, you know.
Yeah, we were talking briefly there about the video I did on Murderball, and I was actually chatting to one of the coaches at Leeds for a time during COVID actually, and he showed me a video, not to be shared, but he showed a video of the Murderball. It was end of the box, and there was two coaches on the middle of the field. Now, okay, I say coaches with inverted commas here, on the middle of the field with loudspeakers just roaring, and everyone else that wasn't playing staff was around the outside of the pitch with a ball. So the second the ball went out of play for a throw and that like that, there was another ball rolled straight back in. So actual percentage ball and play time was 99.5% of how long they were actually playing for. So in a 5x5 minute block, they were playing for 24 minutes and 50 seconds of that, as opposed to in a typical 45 minute half in soccer. You know, the ball might be, I actually don't know the numbers, I'm picking it off the top of my head here now. It might be 30 to 35 minutes. So they're actually getting so much out of those 25 minutes compared to maybe allowing longer dilly-dallying over restarts or something like that. I want to come back to your point, Sarah, and you're saying you will look at game demands and then you look at training. So if we were to start potentially structuring this out for coaches, it's probably worth, if you can get access to championship time stuff, that's probably going to give you the most meaningful stuff you're working towards, but still be monitoring your practice matches and leagues to see what the demands are for those and maybe how you structure preparation over time, but also to see, are they adequately preparing you physically for the demands of championship? And then start toying around with a few different factors within games in trend to see what output did it give me with high speed distance, sprint distance, and we look at accels and decels in a while to see how many of these games are required to build up that amount of time, or in a typical session with these games I'm trying to use to develop specific technical, tactical stuff, do I potentially need to do a couple of top up runs on then afterwards?
Yeah, no, 100%. I would use the game demands, we'll say, of the championship game, for example, on a Sunday, and then I would, I suppose, look at different moments in the game itself, and then we say worst case scenario moments within the game, and then I'd put it into your training session within the week and just try, I suppose, establish the high intensity work within that game itself on the Wednesday, and then I'd go after it then in terms of just kind of putting that in terms of the game, and then also the top up work at the end. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
So no, and like typically then coming in season, then I suppose what I mainly try to get at is, I suppose, at least maintain, if not exceed, the intensity of the match itself on the Sunday, and that goes into the midweek then in the Wednesday. So therefore, like another principle I'd often go by is like try match and exceed the training demands. Try match and exceed the game demands within your training week. So therefore, they're well prepared for the game itself, and like we say, they can tolerate the work that's been done, especially in the intensity spaces. For example, if a player's doing 200 meters of sprint in a match on a Sunday, they will at least be able to do 200 to 250 to maybe 300 on the Wednesday itself. So therefore they're well prepared for the game itself, just to simplify it as much as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's spot on. And when it comes to more positional demands, and we look at top-ups and stuff, like I had a player a couple of weeks ago saying, can we do more position-specific conditioning? And I said, we do like 3/4 of our work through games anyway. You're getting all the position-specific stuff there. The top-up runs are literally blanket over everyone, let's make sure it's there. Should we go a little more position-specific with our top-ups as well as the games, or...?
Oh, like, great question. And I've seen that being done. For example, like... an example that would be tempo work, okay? So you'd have the inside lines and they'd go on 0 to 65 in their 10 seconds or 11 seconds, but then they have to do 2 push-ups. Whereas the middle 8 would have to go 100 metre tempo, 21 to 21, and they come through around 17, 18 seconds, but no push-up, because typically your middle 8 have to do more running. But then I'm like, I was thinking about it and I was like, realistically, 3/4 of the session is going to be... we say position specific anyway. For example, the inside line will be stuck in the inside line within the matches themselves or the games themselves. So that is enough specificity locked in already. I think it's just a high speed running block of everyone doing 100 metre runs on tempos. I think that is probably well prepared number. That's we'll say specificity locked in as much as we need it to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought the same, and that's what I was trying to get back to him, because sometimes sometimes we can be too specific. Like, it is like the top-up runs, they are a physiological adaptation as well. So let's just keep it fairly broad here and work a bit under the hood, as opposed to trying to be overcomplicating it a little bit in what we're doing.
I think it's just keeping it simple, because they are getting their specificity locked in already with their positional demands within the games. And like, if you were to go on that, then we'll say of their tempo work, like there'll be a massive gap between, like, we'll say, the inside lines and the middle 8 in terms of the report coming back or the work being done. So for me, anyway, I like to keep it simple and just give them all the same amount of high speed running work, because previously in the session of 3/4 of the session or 2/3 of the session, they're we'll say they're in their specificity of their positional demands within the inside lines or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So we've looked at like sprint distance and high speed distance. Some ones we can go a little bit more nuanced in and say, like, you're comfortable with this, you know how to manage it, report it, whatever. We can start looking at some accelerations, decelerations, and what we touched on before, something I would have used when I did have access to it, but can be a little bit harder for coaches who aren't as experienced to grasp, is meters per minute. Can you give us briefly, like, because they're not as common in terms, what are the accelerations, decelerations, what are they telling us about something, and the same then for meters per minute?
So like the A cells and D cells is telling us, I suppose, the amount of stop and starting essentially within the game, and like you're typically looking at 150 overall, 75 of each nearly, and it tells you as well, like, you know, that like if you're doing for more an intensive session within a training session itself, you'll have a lot of them, and it's and then we'll say in an extensive one where you're opening them up more, you'd have less high speed A cells and D cells. And I suppose from a coach's point of view, it's important to observe that and see, like, for example, if you're working in a session where it's really all really small set of games and you're trying to get a bigger picture of everything, it's important to observe that, I suppose, see the data come back on your GPS, and then, like, to make sure that, I suppose, they're well prepared, you need to just maybe open them up with a few high speed runs in terms of tempos and stuff like that. So it's important to be able to observe that and see and make a call on it as well within the session, that right, it is very tight, and if you're not, I suppose, going to open them up, you need to try to get some extra running blocks into them. And then in terms of the meters per minute, I suppose that's just an indicator of intensity as well, and I suppose you're looking at, we'll say, in around 95 to 125 meters per minute, and it tells you, I suppose, how much they're running within that minute of work. Yeah, so basically just another measure of intensity as well, and you're just trying to, I suppose, get that box off there.
Yeah, I would use the meters per minute before to kind of categorise my games. If I knew, like, a match was generally position specific, but somewhere between 105 and 120 meters per minute was the average of of a match, say, I go in and look at the 5-minute blocks, say, okay, some of these are up around 140. I will have a couple of games that give me 140 to 160, a couple that give me 120 to 140, and I'd mix and match those across the week to try and drive fitness alongside a few other bits. On the accels and decels, and something I was conscious of there, probably because I'm getting old and I realise it more myself, is there tends to be more of a higher neuromuscular load if they get quite high. And again, older players can complain, warranted, of just more hip and knee pain if there's an awful lot more accels, decels. I think, well, obviously you need to be wary of the high speed run jumping up too much and fatigue and hamstrings. I think there can be a little bit more maybe longer term soreness if the accels, decels jump up a bit.
Yeah, no, 100%, and also just lead to a lot more fatigue as well, which will also, if you're older, you might, I suppose, hinder the recovery as well, and they might struggle to recover over the week. So therefore, be mindful of that, them ACLs, decels, if you want to get more work into them within the week. So yeah, definitely just, I suppose, being mindful of that was important.
And if you're doing small city games or medium, or just games in general, you need to be mindful of the conditions you set up your pitch in as to how they drive more or less of that. Like a bigger or more expansive pitch will give more high speed run, and a smaller pitch will give more accels, decels. But also bear in mind, whatever physical adaptations you're targeting will have technical and tactical implications. And if you want to play a running game, a long passing game, but all these small sided games get your accels, decels, it is going to force more short passing. So there is a little bit of a balance to be had there, considering your style of play alongside the physical outputs.
Yeah, 100%. No, definitely, and also the amount of, I suppose, numbers within the game itself as well will add to that, the outcome we're trying to achieve. For example, if you have more numbers within the space itself, would add more ACLs and decels and change up your, I suppose, technical demands as well on the game itself.
Okay, good. Now, I just want to give you a chance to plug yourself a bit here, saying, so say, again, I am that coach who just got GPS of all this data. I'm not entirely sure what to do with it. You are currently like fulfilling a role for a number of teams and helping coaches or managers manage all of this.
Yeah. So basically, I suppose, my role at the moment is kind of like a performance lead on various clubs and teams as well. So what I would do is, I suppose, I'd help design the session itself, as we've discussed, in terms of, we'll say, the games within the session, the skill blocks, the running blocks and stuff like that. And then did have GPSs. I suppose a lot of the players, or some of the players, would have GPSs, and they don't all need to have it. And therefore we would get an objective measure, I suppose, of the work being done. And then they'd feed that GPS data within the online portal, where I can observe the work being done. And I can give feedback to the players and the management to, I suppose, how much work was done. Was it enough? Was it too much? Or was it too little? I suppose for what they're trying to prepare for, which is the game itself. And I do that amongst a few different teams. So 6 teams I work that for, and it just gives feedback to the management and the coaching staff to, I suppose, how much to push on or how much to pull back. And I suppose how we can do it remotely for the 6 different teams is, I suppose, through the GPS, feeding information into the data, into the dashboard, into the portal. And then it kind of makes it more of a sustainable approach and model to, I suppose, help manage various teams and support different teams as well from a performance lead. So that's how I kind of work it amongst my own work is they'd wear GPSs, we designed the session together, we'd see, do we meet the targets. If they did meet the targets, all good. But if they're if they're not meeting the targets, may need to redesign the session itself or modify the session if it's too much or too little work being done.
And are there any common, I wouldn't say issues, but common areas you're like, okay, this is consistently cropping up and something I need to address? You're probably at a stage now where you're foreshadowing that and need to address it in advance, I suppose.
What commonly actually comes up is, as we previously discussed, is that there's a lot of sessions where it's all very small-sided stuff. Therefore, that brings on a lot of ACLs and decels, and therefore they're actually not getting enough maybe sprint distance in or high-speed running distance in. That's the most common issue that comes back, especially amongst hurling groups. where it's all very tight. They're trying to, I suppose, drive the technical work, whereas all more small-sided stuff, getting as many touches in as possible. So therefore, I suppose, going off that then, I nearly often have ideas in my head. I'd have the plan made up, but I'd also have other backups in my head in terms of what extra blocks may I need to, I suppose, prescribe here to make sure that they have enough work being done. So therefore, it could be a longer running rep to try to balance out all them small-sided stuff and work being done. So that's typically the most common thing that comes back in Gaelic Games.
And you've worked, let's say, majority of listeners to this are GAA based. When you were in Australia, did you work with a few other sports there? And do you notice big differences?
I worked with rugby league and AFL, and like there is a big difference between not a big difference. There is a difference between the demands of and the preparation for rugby league and AFL to Gaelic Games. With rugby league, I will start with it is very much the big sprint game, so it's a very very power based game. And if everyone knows rugby league is slightly different to rugby union, where it's just kind of running big straight lines and then stop and then rinse and repeat that. So it's important to be able to get, I suppose, strong acceleration and good power and good sprint work in. Therefore, within the preparation for that is we will go after, I suppose, their sprint work. And we will go after their max speed and the accelerations as well. We keep more of an eye on. And then with the AFL, very much a more longer running based sport where they're covering a lot of distance. And they have long duration games. And it's important, I suppose, to have their hamstrings well conditioned, be able to tolerate high speed running, because they would do a lot of that. So there is a big difference, and I suppose there's massive learnings from both AFL and rugby league coming into, I suppose, preparing teams for Gaelic Games as well. Again, like as we mentioned previously, you're looking at the game demands, you're looking at other demands, and you work back from that in your training weeks and your preparation there.
And culturally, do you notice any difference in terms of how teams prepare? Like you were mainly football growing up, and then you went out and saw how Aussie Rules and Rugby League prepare teams. Are there any bits you're like, oh, I see the demands, but I didn't expect them to prepare like that? And you're either like saw them as positive or negative and brought them back to doing stuff.
That's massive, yeah. Like 100%, I recognise it culturally. Like for example, in the AFL, it's very much a running culture. Like they love their longer reps, they love their running based preparation, whereas they wouldn't be as biased towards doing the power and strength work within the gym. At times they may be afraid to put on size because it may add weight, which could affect their running performance. And then in rugby league, slightly different. They're very good in the gym, very biased towards power and strength, and they can lift very well, and they go after that a lot. So there is a massive difference between the two, and I suppose how I've got my learnings from both of them, I kind of combined my learnings from both and bring it into where I'm at now in terms of I have a good bias towards aerobic fitness and running demands and running power, but also I got that from the AFL, and then with the rugby league brought in, I suppose, the preparation within the gym, the power, the strength, the resilience, the work they need to have as well, because it is a very contact based game and they do need to be robust and resilient. So I've combined, I suppose, both learnings, both cultures to, I suppose, my own, I suppose, coaching philosophy where it's at now. And
I'll circle back then a bit to some of your current roles. You've worked with some really high level teams, but I want to know, it's a lot of club coaches in here, are there reasonably consistent differences or proportions of demands or work done, say from senior intercounty to club? Like is it a scaled down version, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
So is there basically the question, is there a big difference between we say intercounty to the club level, is it?
Yeah, is it just they say men's anyway, they play for 70, club play for 60, so is it just a percentage of, or are some metrics not scaled?
There is, like, in terms of the high intensity work is much more scaled back, like the intensity in the high speed running and the sprint, and the speed as well is much lesser at club level versus intercounty, because the physical attributes of intercounty players will be that bit better. They'd be more physically prepared, so therefore they can actually hit the higher intensity work, get into the zones within the GPS, and I suppose get that work done that bit easier. In terms of total distance, there actually isn't a massive amount of difference between the total distance. We say if you're looking at it, we say relative to 60 minutes to 70 minutes, because they're still running around for 70 minutes, and that would typically bring in, within a 70-minute game, you could be looking, or 60-minute game, you could be looking at 8 to 9k, and then we say 70 minutes could be 9 to 10k, you know. So the duration would really dictate or determine the total distance being done. But definitely in the high intensity work, there is a difference, right, between intercounty and club level, just because the intercounty players will be that bit more physically prepared, physically able. For example, they're faster, they're stronger, they're fitter, whereas club players may not be as that. Do you know what I mean? So that would be the big discrepancy there.
And is it like would targeting, preparing more high speed capacity in club players be a bit of low hanging fruit or a worthwhile target, or is it just the physical characteristics of senior intercounty allow them to do more of that?
That's a good question. Like in terms of, I would think that the physical characteristics and of intercounty players would allow them to reach them greater, I suppose, thresholds, them higher outputs. So therefore, like if I was, I suppose what I would go after would go after first of all the base, the foundation, get them stronger, get them fitter, and then when they have that, I suppose, capacity within them, then you can go after, we say, learn them up with high speed running, learn them up with sprint work, because if you do learn them up with high speed running and sprint work before, or when they're not able to actually tolerate that work, typically what they would happen over time is they just break down because the body can't tolerate the work being done. So I would build their capacities first and then put that work into them. But you'd sprinkle it in the whole time. You sprinkle in the high speed running, you sprinkle in the sprint distance work, the sprint work, the speed work. But you would be mindful of what they can actually tolerate. Do you know, for example, I've often had players where they're very unfit, they're carrying a small bit of weight, and like instead of the team doing their tempo work or their sprint work, I'd actually put them aside and I'd give them modified work that he is able for until that person is able to do the work. Then I'd start putting them into the sprint work. That's an example of why I would look at their capacities, their physical ability first before I put them into that kind of into that work.
That's why it's often really important to do like a well planned and structured pre-season that looks at what you want to be doing in the summer and coming backwards from that, as opposed to just throwing a pile of work at players, say, right, let's lose weight and get fit and then we can go hurling or football. We need to target the way we want to play hurling and football and build for that in our pre-season.
Yeah, and all 100%, like, and it is important to, I suppose, get the pre-season, the off-season and the pre-season into them well planned, leading up to their summer's work, and you're looking at building capacities, and then you can start, we'll say, once their capacities such as their fitness and their strength are fit for purpose, then you can start sprinkling in your higher intensity work, you know, your sprint work, your high speed running work, so then they can actually tolerate that work safely.
And you've worked across codes. Are there, say if you're listening to this and you're coaching an LGFA team or a Camogie team, I know you're more LGFA than Camogie, is it still very similar principles on, like, objectively, but then are there some different cultural differences you need to take into consideration when working with, say, an LGFA team?
Yeah, like, in fairness, with the ladies football, like, it's very much more of nearly a running based sport than Gaelic Games, because of just the way the game is. They run up and down the pitch a lot more, and culturally, in fairness, like, they have a great appetite for the work and getting the work done, and they do understand that, like, you do need to be very fit and fast to have an impact within the game. So if you just go and observe any of the ladies football games or the Camogie games, that those that I suppose are that bit more athletic have the greater impact within the game. For example, like your Vicky Wall of Meath, you know, like, have massive impact in the game, and because she has that turn of pace, that explosiveness, that power, that running power, that so, like, in terms of culturally, like, they do understand that, like, it is easier to have an impact to if you have that running power within them and that running capacity within them as well. So yeah. Something
then I don't know how to do this best, and I think it depends a lot on so many factors, but the management of subs. If you've, like, you know the demands of the game, and you know some of your players have played the full 70 or the full 60, some have played 40, some have played 10, some have played nothing. Still being informed by GPS, but also being aware of the potential knock-on impact psychologically. How do you manage that? Like I say, team I'm currently with, myself and the manager both agreed we don't do extra run with the subs. We try and make it up in other ways across the week. But after the match, we're not running tempos. Someone I chat to a lot, he works at a professional soccer team, and he has it like down to a T. He said in 12 minutes after the game, straight after the game, he can get his subs to hit the high speed run demands, and in 45 minutes next morning, he knows a couple of different small city games he can rely on, and they give him all his accels and decels. So within 14 hours post game, the subs are topped up in both. I am still so wary about doing that at club level. Intercounty level, fully accept, yeah, it needs to be done. But club, I think it's so dependent on the culture within the club. What have you seen from?
Yeah, like that's great. That's a great point, and like I have the same, I suppose, challenges as well. Intercounty level is not as hard, so I'd be the same. I'd have probably 10 to 12 minutes after the game, get their high intensity work into them. For example, your sprint work, your high speed running work, get that in all within the 12 minutes. And then their next, we'll say, training session that's to come, they might do an extra small bit of work there in terms of, we'll say, an extra game there. If it was the Tuesday session or the Wednesday session, that's no problem. And like in terms of, I suppose, you set it up as you mean to go on. So you set it up, started off early in the year, and that's what's expected after the games. Club level, definitely it's a bit more challenging, like trying to get them to do top up work after a game. I would be thinking more so just using the next club session and give them 10 to 15 minutes more there, because you need to know, I suppose, that like it just may not be motivating enough for them to do runs after a game where they weren't picked or they weren't played at all. So like doing it 10 or 15 minutes at the next pre-session within the week or within the month, the work is done. Do you know what I mean? So I'd often look at it from a week's perspective, how much work has been done within the week, and that usually does fill up that gap there, you know. But it is an interesting one, yeah. It's rare enough to get it done within club teams, but it's easy enough to get it done in intercounty. But I would use the next session in the training session to get the work done.
Because there are a few other factors, like oftentimes the subs on your senior team will often be playing intermediate or junior B or something, so they do get the games. Now, I know they're completely different intensity, but it is still more total work. And plus, you're doing the top up to have them prepared for coming championship time. And often at club level, you do have essentially a smaller pool of players that you're actually picking from come championship time, so you need to balance that off against it as well. I think so much of it though, as you said, you started out early in the year and explained the reason behind it to the players. I think if you just throw it in May, you're like, right, subs, you're going to run, and they're all like, what's going on here? I think like that's probably the most important point.
On that, like a lot of the time the players that aren't picked for the first team will say there's going to be another team for them to get their work done within the week. And like just back to the point where you started off early in the year, for example, one thing I'd often commonly do is in their cool down or do this resilient strength block at the end every cool down at the end of every training session. And like it's essentially to circuit for 5 minutes doing your long lever hamstrings or your Nordics and stuff like that. And at the start of the year, like they're kind of getting used to it, they're adapting to it, and they're like thinking this is a bit of extra hassle, like but then as the weeks go on, as the months go on, it's the norm, and they understand the benefits of injury prevention, resilience, robustness work, and like if you can start it off the top ups at the end of a game, likewise for that, they'll understand that as well, you know, and it just becomes the norm, and they just do it then.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Just mentioned earlier there around if you don't have 15 GPS, say if you've like 8 or 10, what's the best way to manage use of those? Do you pick 8 lads or girls and stick with them? Do you rotate around a bit of both?
No, like you would, like for it's very common, like you could have ranging between 2 to 8 GPSs. And what I commonly do is I would rotate it around, and I would often just pick different positional lines within the team. For example, if an inside forward and inside back, so full forward, full back, they'd get one each, and then you would have a middle eight player. You would give them to them as well. So then you're getting a good idea of, I suppose, the work being done, and you can nearly, I suppose, have an estimate then of how much work has been done between the two different lines. And also then maybe picking different fitnesses as well. For example, if you do a fitness test at the start of the year, you know someone that's very fit, they'll probably get at the higher end of the work being done, and then someone that maybe not as fit or middle of the road. Therefore, you get an estimate of these kind of this area of or this amount of work being done by this type of fitness player. So yeah. That's how I'd typically do it, and it is more common that you only have like we say 4, maybe 2 to 8 GPSs rather than we say 20 to 30 GPSs. Unless you're with an intercounty team, you could have 30 to 40 GPSs, but typically with a club team, it's the lesser number. Like, so then you're getting feedback from the session, because that's what you want at the end of the day from a coach's point of view, is the objective feedback to have we done enough work done, have we too much, too little, and what do we need to do, physically.
Because some players just have their own, like, I know the team I'm at, one lads just has his own GPS. Sometimes I get to send it on, sometimes I don't. It's often just, like, I know the general demands he's going to be placed under. I don't be overly concerned with it. But, like, recently we had a game and I could tell from looking at it, he was way more erect afterwards. He was definitely covering way more ground, so I just wanted to see how it was different to previous. But sometimes it is worthwhile if players are that invested themselves, getting to send John some information afterwards too.
Oh no, 100%. Like getting the information, because it just again comes back to one of the points I made earlier. Like it confirms your assumption that we'll say you've prescribed this work. Is the work correct or not? Or if you're making these observations that like there isn't enough work being done, then the GPS will back it up when you compare it to the game demands itself. So I give it massive value, and I suppose them comparisons as well.
Last question I have then is, do you ever look much at combining the objective and the subjective? Like, do you combine GPS with RP? I used RP in time for the majority of stuff. Like, okay, this pitch size, I want to aim for an RP 7 to 8 and we'll do 3 by 8 minutes. And that's generally what I'm working off, and I know that gives me ish demands. Do you combine both together, and do you notice my differences that drive RP up or down based off similar-ish GPS numbers?
No, 100% I would combine the both. Like after every session, I would either, when they're submitting their GPS work, I'll get them to name their GPS work. I have the RP of their session, so I can get that individually, or I go around and ask them as well. And I would take a lot of value in, say, the RP rating, and also then comparing it to the work that I've prescribed. For example, like longer, harder running intervals, they typically find them harder with the RP. For example, you could do 2-minute repeat or 1-minute repeat at 70% effort. They'd find that would drive the RP up. Whereas shorter work may not have driven the RP work up as much, because it's not as may not be as physically demanding, do you know what I mean, on the body itself. And I would take value in both, and I'd look at both as well, because again you're going back to your game demands, like, and you're looking to game demands itself. If you ever go an RP and match itself, typically that's from 8 to 10 RP if they're playing well, and then you do want to, I suppose, get that into them as well in the training week as well, at least once in the week. So give them some peak in the week if that's the preparation you're looking at, and then so yeah, that's how I'd compare the two, and I would take a lot of value in both the RP and the physical work being done.
Yeah, no, that's all been really good, Fionn. You've answered all the questions I've lined out here. If you want to give your services a little plug there, or where people can look out for you or get in touch if they want to find out a little bit more about all this.
Yeah, so if you want to, I suppose, if you have any further inquiries about, I suppose, the work I'm doing, you can just find me on my Instagram handle of O'Shea Performance, and you can find me on Twitter as well. Fionn O'Shea is my handle there as well. And if you have any further inquiries, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll happily get back to you.
Excellent. Mind yourself. We'll hopefully have you on again at some stage in the future. I'll drop those contact details in the description box and everything below. But Fionn, you've been excellent with your time there, and I really appreciate that.
No bother. Thanks very much, John.